The dust devil that tore through Josephine Taylor's cornfield on that blistering July morning in 1882 seemed to carry with it every ounce of bad luck the neighboring ranchers had been wishing upon her for the past 8 months. She stood on the porch of her weathered farmhouse, watching the twister rip through rows of corn that had taken her every waking hour to plant, tend, and pray over. Her calloused hands gripped the porch railing so hard her knuckles went white, but she refused to let the tears fall. Not yet. Not where anyone passing on the road might see. Greeley, Colorado had been her husband's dream, not hers. Thomas Taylor had brought her here 3 years ago with promises of fertile land and endless possibilities, back when the town was still finding its footing as an agricultural colony. He had died last November, thrown from a spooked horse during an early snowstorm, leaving Josephine with 200 acres, a mortgage she could barely understand, and neighbors who saw her widowhood as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. The Hendersons to the east wanted her land for the creek that ran through it. The Montgomery brothers to the west had been buying up properties to create the largest cattle operation in Weld County. Even Samuel Garrett, who owned the feed store in town and had seemed kind enough when Thomas was alive, had made it clear he would be happy to take the property off her hands for a fraction of what it was worth. They were all waiting, circling like vultures, making sure everyone in town knew that a woman alone could not possibly manage a farm of this size. And maybe they were right. Josephine was only 23 years old, and everything she knew about farming she had learned by watching Thomas work himself to exhaustion. But the alternative was returning to her father's house in St. Louis with nothing but shame and failure, and that was a fate she would not accept. The dust devil dissipated as quickly as it had formed, leaving behind flattened corn stalks and shattered hopes. Josephine finally allowed herself one shaky breath before squaring her shoulders and heading down the porch steps. The damage was worse up close. At least an acre of corn was completely destroyed, and the rest of the field looked battered and weak. She would lose a significant portion of her harvest, which meant she would struggle even more to make the mortgage payment that was due in 3 months. She was kneeling in the dirt, trying to salvage what she could when she heard the sound of horse hooves approaching. Her first instinct was to ignore whoever it was. She was in no mood for another concerned neighbor offering to buy her out of her misery. But the horse stopped at the edge of her property, and a male voice called out, "Madam, looks like you could use some help." Josephine looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. The man sitting atop a sturdy bay horse was someone she had never seen before. He was tall, she could tell even with him sitting, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. He wore a dark hat pulled low, a faded blue shirt, and chaps that had seen better days. His face was honest somehow, with none of the calculating gleam she'd grown accustomed to seeing in the eyes of her neighbors. "I appreciate the offer, but I can manage," she said, her voice coming out sharper than she intended. The man dismounted with an easy grace, looping his horse's reins over her fence post. He walked toward her slowly, his hands visible at his sides as though he understood she might be wary of strangers. Up close, she could see that he was probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in springtime. "Name's Dalton Pierce," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I've been working cattle drives up from Texas, but I'm looking to settle somewhere for a while. Heard in town there might be work available in these parts." "You heard wrong," Josephine said, getting to her feet and brushing dirt from her skirt. "I cannot afford to hire help." Dalton looked around the property, taking in the damaged field, the barn that needed repairs, the fence posts that were leaning at dangerous angles. His gaze was assessing but not judgmental. "Seems like you could use it anyway." "Needing something and being able to afford it are two different things, Mr. Pierce." She met his eyes directly, daring him to argue with her. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." "What if I worked for room and board?" he asked, just temporarily until you get back on your feet. "I am a hard worker, and I know my way around a farm and cattle both." Josephine stared at him, trying to figure out his angle. In her experience, nobody offered help without expecting something in return. "Why would you do that?" Dalton shrugged, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Maybe I'm tired of drifting. Maybe I like the look of this place. Maybe I just do not like seeing someone struggle when I could do something about it. He paused, then added more quietly, My mother tried to run a farm on her own after my father died. I remember how hard that was. The mention of his mother softened something in Josephine's chest, but she forced herself to remain practical. Having a strange man living on her property would cause talk, and she already had enough problems without adding scandal to the list. People will gossip. People gossip anyway, Dalton said, but I can sleep in the barn, keep everything proper. I give you my word I will be nothing but respectful. Josephine looked at her ruined cornfield, then at her sagging barn, then back at Dalton Pierce. She was exhausted, bone-deep tired in a way that sleep never seemed to fix. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. 1 month, she said finally. You can stay for 1 month and we will see how it goes. But I am the one who makes the decisions about this farm. You work for me, not the other way around. Yes, madam, Dalton said. And this time, his smile reached his eyes. I would not have it any other way. That first day set the pattern for what followed. Dalton proved to be exactly what he had claimed, a tireless worker who knew his way around livestock and crops. He fixed the barn roof, repaired the fence line, and spent hours helping Josephine salvage what she could from the damaged cornfield. He was up before dawn and worked until well past sunset, stopping only for the simple meals Josephine prepared. But more than his physical labor, it was his presence that made the difference. For the first time since Thomas died, Josephine did not feel completely alone. Dalton did not talk much, but when he did, he asked her opinion and actually listened to her answers. He treated her like a partner, not a charity case or a problem to be solved. The neighbors noticed, of course. Within a week, half of Greeley seemed to know that Josephine Taylor had hired a drifter cowboy to work her farm. Samuel Garrett made a point of mentioning it when Josephine came into town for supplies. Heard you took on some help, he said, his tone making it clear what he thought of that decision. Man like that, moving from place to place, you have to wonder what he's running from. Mr. Pierce is a fine worker, Josephine said coolly, and my employment decisions are my own business. Just seems unwise, that's all, Garrett continued. Woman alone, strange man living on her property. People worry about you, Josephine. Then people should mind their own affairs, she replied, taking her supplies and leaving before he could say anything else. But Garrett's words stayed with her as she drove her wagon back to the farm. She realized she knew almost nothing about Dalton Pierce beyond what he had told her that first day. For all she knew, Garrett could be right. Maybe Dalton was running from something. Maybe she had been foolish to trust him so quickly. That evening after supper, she found Dalton in the barn checking on her milk cow. He looked up when she entered, something questioning in his expression. Is something wrong? He asked. Josephine hesitated, then decided directness was best. People in town are asking questions about you, about why you are here. Dalton nodded slowly, setting down the brush he had been using on the cow. I figured they would. Small towns are like that. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I told you the truth about my mother. She raised me and my sister on her own after my father died in a mining accident. I was 12, and I watched her work herself half to death trying to keep our place going. The neighbors were no help. They wanted her to fail so they could buy the land cheap. He met Josephine's eyes. Eventually, she had to sell. We lost everything. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in that situation, I would. So I am a charity case to you, Josephine said, hating how her voice sounded small. No, Dalton said firmly. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. You are trying to do something most men would fail at, and you are doing it alone. That's not weakness, madam. That is courage. He paused. But courage does not mean you have to refuse help when it is offered honestly. Josephine felt something shift inside her chest, some wall she had built beginning to crack. Where is your family now? Your mother and sister? My mother passed 6 years ago. Heart just gave out. My sister married a shopkeeper in Denver. She's happy, has 3 children now. Dalton smiled, but there was sadness in it. I visit when I can, but I've never been good at staying in one place. Always figured I was looking for something, but I did not know what. And you think you will find it here? In Greeley? Dalton looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Maybe I already have. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Josephine did not want to name. She cleared her throat and stepped back. Well, thank you for telling me. I should get back to the house. She fled before he could respond, her heart beating too fast. Back in the safety of her kitchen, she pressed her hands against her flushed cheeks and tried to calm down. She could not afford to develop feelings for Dalton Pierce. He had said himself that he was a drifter, someone who never stayed in one place, and she had a farm to save, a future to secure. Romance was a luxury she absolutely could not afford. But over the following weeks, ignoring her growing feelings became increasingly difficult. Dalton was unfailingly kind and respectful, but there were moments when their hands would brush as they worked side by side, or when she would catch him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. He brought her wildflowers once, claiming they had just been in his way while he was clearing the irrigation ditch, but the careful way he had arranged them in an old jar suggested otherwise. The real test came in late August, when Richard Montgomery rode onto her property with 2 of his ranch hands. Montgomery was the older of the Montgomery brothers, a heavy-set man in his 50s with small, calculating eyes. He had been the most persistent about trying to buy her out. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, not bothering to dismount, "I wanted to check on how you were managing. Heard you had some crop damage from that dust devil last month." Josephine, who had been working in her vegetable garden, straightened up and wiped her hands on her apron. "I am managing just fine, Mr. Montgomery." "That's so." Montgomery's gaze drifted to where Dalton was visible near the barn, working on replacing a broken wagon wheel. "That the drifter everyone is talking about?" "That is Mr. Pierce, who works for me." Montgomery's laugh was unpleasant. "Works for you with what money? Everyone knows you're about to lose this place, Josephine. Why not sell to me now while you can still get a decent price, better than waiting for the bank to take it?" "The bank will not be taking anything," Josephine said, her voice cold. "I will make my mortgage payment when it is due." "With what?" Montgomery pressed. "Half your corn is ruined, you have got no cattle to sell, and from what I hear, you cannot even afford to pay that cowboy proper wages. You are fooling yourself if you think you can hold on to this place." Dalton had stopped working and was walking toward them, his stride purposeful. "The lady said she was managing fine," he said evenly. "Seems like your business here is done." Montgomery's face reddened. "This does not concern you, drifter. This is between me and Mrs. Taylor." "Anything concerning Mrs. Taylor concerns me," Dalton replied, his voice still calm but with an edge to it now. "And she has asked you to leave." "Actually, I have not asked him yet," Josephine interjected, "but I am asking now. Mr. Montgomery, please leave my property." Montgomery stared at them both, his expression ugly. "You are making a mistake, both of you. When this place fails, and it will, do not come crying to me for help." He yanked his horse's head around and spurred away, his ranch hands following. Josephine waited until they were out of sight before letting out a shaky breath. "Thank you," she said to Dalton. "He was right about one thing, though. I do not know how I'm going to make the mortgage payment, even with all your help. The crop loss was too severe." Dalton was quiet for a moment, then said, "What if we diversified? You have got good grazing land here. We could take on some cattle on shares, fatten them up, and sell them. There's always a market for good beef." "I do not have money to buy cattle." "You would not need to," Dalton explained. "Some ranchers will lease out their stock. We graze them, care for them, and when we sell, we split the profit. It is a common enough arrangement." Josephine considered this. It was risky, but Dalton was right about her land. The pastures were good, with access to water from the creek. "Do you know anyone who might agree to such an arrangement?" "I know a rancher down near Colorado Springs. Good man, breeds quality stock. I could ride down there, talk to him, Would take me about 4 days round trip. The thought of Dalton leaving, even for 4 days, created an unexpected hollow feeling in Josephine's chest, but she pushed it aside. If you think it could work, then yes, please go. Dalton left the next morning, and Josephine immediately felt his absence like a physical ache. She had grown used to his steady presence, the sound of his voice, the way he would occasionally hum while he worked. The farm felt emptier without him, and she found herself watching the road far too often, waiting for his return. He had been gone for 3 days when Harold Henderson, her neighbor to the east, paid her a visit. Henderson was a thin, nervous man who had always seemed overshadowed by his more aggressive wife, Mildred. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, twisting his hat in his hands, "I wanted to speak with you about a delicate matter." Josephine invited him to sit on the porch, offering him water. He drank deeply before speaking again. "It is about your hired man, Mr. Pierce," Henderson said. "Mildred has been saying things in town suggesting that there is something improper going on between you two." Josephine felt her face heat with anger. "There is nothing improper happening on my property, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Pierce sleeps in the barn and conducts himself with complete propriety." "I believe you," Henderson said quickly. "But Mildred, well, she is convinced that Montgomery is going to get your land, and she wants to make sure we are positioned to buy the creek access from him. She thinks if she damages your reputation enough, you will have to leave town entirely." "Why are you telling me this?" Josephine asked, studying the man's face. Henderson looked ashamed. "Because it is not right. You have done nothing wrong, and Thomas was a good man who was kind to me. I cannot stop Mildred from talking, but I thought you should know what you are up against." After Henderson left, Josephine sat on the porch steps, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her. It was not enough that she was fighting to save her farm, battling crop failures and money troubles. Now she had to contend with deliberate sabotage of her reputation as well. Part of her wanted to give up, to accept that maybe everyone was right and she could not do this alone. But then she thought of Dalton's words, "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met." She thought of her husband Thomas, who had believed so deeply in this place. She thought of Dalton's mother, who had fought until she had nothing left. And she decided that she would not make it easy for them. If they wanted her land, they would have to tear it from her hands. Dalton returned late the next afternoon with news that made Josephine's heart lift for the first time in days. The rancher had agreed to lease them 20 head of cattle for the fall and winter. They would arrive within the week. "John Carmichael is his name," Dalton explained as they walked out to check the pastures. "Good Christian man, fair in his dealings. The cattle are young steers, should put on weight well with good grass and care. If we can get them through the winter and sell them in the spring, the profit should be enough for your mortgage payment and then some." "I do not know how to thank you," Josephine said, overwhelmed with relief. "You have done so much already." "I am not doing it for thanks," Dalton said quietly. They had reached the creek, and he stopped to lean against a cottonwood tree, looking at her with those steady eyes. "Josephine, I need to tell you something." Her heart started beating faster at his use of her first name. "What is it?" "When I rode onto your property that day, I told myself I would stay a month, help you get back on your feet, then move on like I always do." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "But somewhere along the way, this stopped being about keeping a promise to myself about helping someone like my mother. Somewhere along the way, I started staying because of you." Josephine could not breathe. "Dalton, I do not think we should—" "I know," he said quickly. "I know you have got enough to worry about without me complicating things, and I know I am just a drifter with nothing to my name. But I need you to know that I care about you, Josephine, more than I have ever cared about anyone. And if you will let me, I want to stay. Not just for a month or a season, but for as long as you will have me." "People already talk," Josephine whispered. "If they think there is something between us, it will only make things worse." "Then let's give them something real to talk about," Dalton said. "Marry me, Josephine. Let me stand beside you, not as your hired hand, but as your husband. Let me help you fight for this place as my home too, not just yours." Josephine stared at him, torn between what her heart wanted and what her practical mind insisted was impossible. "You barely know me. We have known each other for barely 2 months. I know you are stubborn and proud and brave as any person I have ever met, Dalton said, stepping closer. I know you would rather break than bend. I know you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders and refuse to let anyone see when it gets too heavy. I know you take your coffee with too much sugar and that you hum the same hymn every Sunday morning while you make breakfast. I know that when you smile, really smile, it feels like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He reached out and gently took her hand. I know enough, Josephine. The question is whether you know enough about me. I know you are kind, Josephine said, her voice shaking. I know you are honest and hardworking. I know you have never made me feel weak or incapable even when I was failing. I know that when you are near, I do not feel so alone anymore. She looked up at him, tears threatening. But Dalton, I cannot be another responsibility for you to shoulder. I will not be someone you have to take care of. You think that is what this is? Dalton asked, and there was something fierce in his voice now. Josephine, you are the strongest person I know. I do not want to take care of you. I want to stand beside you. There is a difference. I am afraid, she admitted in a whisper. I loved Thomas, and then he was just gone. If I let myself love you and something happens, I know, Dalton said gently. Loving someone is terrifying, but Josephine, we are not promised tomorrow whether we love or not. The only question is whether we are brave enough to love anyway. Josephine looked into his face, at the honesty there, and felt something inside her let go. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. Dalton's face transformed with his smile, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Josephine pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Greeley. The pastor, Reverend Williams, was an elderly man who had known Thomas and who seemed genuinely happy for Josephine. There were few guests. Dalton's sister Emma made the trip from Denver with her family, and Harold Henderson attended despite his wife's fury. Samuel Garrett and the Montgomerys were notably absent, which suited Josephine just fine. Josephine wore a simple blue dress that had been her mother's, and Dalton wore new trousers and a white shirt he had purchased for the occasion. When he slipped the thin gold band onto her finger, Josephine felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was different from her marriage to Thomas, which had been arranged by their families. This was her choice, made with clear eyes and a full heart. The cattle arrived 2 days after the wedding, and Josephine and Dalton spent the autumn settling into their new life together. Dalton moved his belongings from the barn into the farmhouse, and they established a rhythm that felt natural despite its newness. They worked side by side during the day, caring for the cattle, finishing the harvest of what crops had survived, preparing the farm for winter. At night, they would sit together by the fire, Dalton reading aloud from books while Josephine mended clothes or worked on her account books. There was an intimacy to it that went beyond the physical, though Josephine found that aspect of marriage easier with Dalton than it had been with Thomas. Dalton was patient and gentle, making her feel cherished rather than obligated. He made her laugh too, something that had been in short supply in her life for far too long, but their happiness seemed to make their neighbors even more determined to see them fail. In October, someone cut a section of their fence, allowing several cattle to wander onto Henderson property. Mildred Henderson immediately claimed the animals had damaged her garden and demanded compensation. Dalton rode over and repaired the fence himself, offering Mrs. Henderson a fair price for the damage, but the woman's hostility was palpable. "You think you are so clever," she hissed at him when Josephine was not around, "marrying her for her land. But that farm is going under, and when it does, you will move on to your next victim." "I married Josephine because I love her," Dalton said evenly, "and that farm is going to succeed whether you like it or not." Then in November, someone spread rumors in town that the cattle were diseased, trying to damage their reputation before they could sell the stock. Dalton had to bring the veterinarian out from Fort Collins to examine the herd, and provide written documentation of their health. The trip cost money they could barely afford, but it was necessary to counter the lies. Through it all, Josephine felt her love for Dalton growing deeper. He never complained about the difficulties, never suggested that they should give up. Instead, he met each challenge with determination and a steady faith that they would prevail. He made her believe it too. Winter came early that year. With the first heavy snow falling in late November, Josephine and Dalton spent long evenings going over their finances, trying to figure out how to make everything work. The cattle were doing well, gaining weight steadily, but they would not be ready to sell until spring. The mortgage payment was due in January, and even with their most optimistic projections, they would be short. "We could sell some of the farm equipment," Dalton suggested one night as they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. "The old plow, maybe some of the tools we're not using." "It would not be enough," Josephine said, pressing her fingers to her temples where a headache was forming. "We would need at least another $100, and I do not think we could get that much for equipment." Dalton was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have some money saved. It is not much, but it might be enough to make up the difference." Josephine looked up sharply. "You have savings? Why did you not mention this before?" "Because it is money I've been setting aside to buy land of my own someday," Dalton admitted. "But this is my land now, isn't it? Ours. It makes sense to use it here." "No," Josephine said firmly. "I will not let you give up your dreams for me." "You are my dream now," Dalton said simply. "This place, this life with you, that is what I want. Josephine, let me do this." They argued about it for days, but in the end, Josephine had to concede. Without Dalton's savings, they would lose everything. It felt like failure, like she was taking advantage of his good nature, but Dalton would not hear of it. "A marriage is a partnership," he told her as they lay in bed one night, his arm around her shoulders. "What is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. We are in this together." Josephine turned to face him in the darkness. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier now than they had the first time she had said them. "I do not tell you that enough, but I do. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Dalton said, kissing her forehead, "and I promise you we are going to make this work." They made the mortgage payment in January, using Dalton's savings to cover the shortfall. The banker, a stern man named Whitmore, seemed almost disappointed to receive the money. Josephine walked out of the bank with her head high, Dalton's hand warm in hers. But as they walked back to their wagon, they encountered Richard Montgomery on the street. "Well, well," Montgomery said, his voice dripping with false cheer. "Managed to scrape together the payment, did you? I am impressed. Let's see if you can keep it up." "We will," Josephine said coldly. "Maybe," Montgomery said, "but I wonder how your new husband will feel when he is still struggling on that hard-scrabble farm a year from now, 2 years from now. A man like that, used to moving around, I give it 6 months before he realizes what a mistake he made." Dalton stepped forward, his face hard. "You do not know anything about me or my wife. But I will tell you this once, Montgomery, stay away from our property. If I find out you are behind any of the trouble we have been having, there will be consequences." "Is that a threat?" Montgomery blustered. "It is a promise," Dalton said. "Now excuse us, we have work to do." They left Montgomery standing on the sidewalk, but his words haunted Josephine. What if he was right? What if Dalton eventually regretted tying himself to her and her struggling farm? She tried to push the thoughts away, but they persisted. That night, as they prepared for bed, Dalton seemed to sense her mood. "What Montgomery said today is bothering you," he observed. Josephine sighed. "What if he is right? What if you wake up one day and realize you gave up your freedom for this?" Dalton caught her hand and pulled her to sit beside him on the bed. "Josephine, look at me." When she met his eyes, he continued, "I spent 10 years of my life drifting from place to place, never putting down roots, never letting myself care too much about anything or anyone. I told myself I was free, but really I was just lost. I did not find freedom until I found you. This farm, this life, you are not a cage I am trapped in. You are the home I have been looking for my whole life." Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks. "I was so afraid of loving you," she whispered. "I thought if I let myself care, I would just end up hurt again, but now I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Then do not," Dalton said, wiping her tears away with his thumb. "We are going to have a long, happy life together, Josephine. I promise you that." Winter deepened, and life on the farm settled into a quieter rhythm. The cattle were healthy and thriving, and Dalton spent his days making improvements to the property. He reinforced the barn, built a new chicken coop, and started plans for a larger house to eventually replace the small farmhouse. Josephine found herself happier than she had ever been despite the ongoing financial pressures. She loved waking up beside Dalton, loved the easy conversation between them, loved the way he would sometimes catch her around the waist and kiss her for no reason other than that he felt like it. She had not known marriage could be like this, a partnership built on respect and genuine affection. In February, Josephine realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had been afraid to hope. When she finally worked up the courage to tell Dalton, his face transformed with joy. "A baby," he breathed, pulling her into his arms. "Josephine, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy? I am the luckiest man alive," Dalton said, kissing her thoroughly. "This is everything I never knew I wanted." But the joy was tempered by practical concerns. A baby meant more expenses, and they were still barely making ends meet. Dalton took on extra work, hiring himself out to other farms when he could spare the time. Josephine hated seeing him work himself so hard, but she understood the necessity. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought hope with it. The cattle had made it through the winter in excellent condition, and when Dalton took them to market in April, the prices were better than they had dared to expect. After settling their account with John Carmichael, they had enough profit to cover their expenses for several months and to set aside a small cushion for emergencies. "We are going to make it," Dalton said, as they sat at the kitchen table looking at their much-improved account books. "We actually might pull this off." Josephine felt tears of relief threaten. They had survived the winter. They had made the mortgage payment. They had a baby coming. Against all odds, they were succeeding. But their troubles were not quite over. In May, Richard Montgomery made one final attempt to acquire their property. He came to the farm with a lawyer and claimed that there was a problem with their land deed, that a portion of their property actually belonged to him based on an old survey. Dalton spent 3 days in the county records office going through dusty old documents until he found proof that their deed was legitimate and that Montgomery's claim was baseless. When he presented the evidence to Montgomery's lawyer, the man withdrew the claim immediately, clearly embarrassed to have been part of such an obvious fraud. Montgomery, realizing he had been beaten, finally gave up. Word spread through Greeley that the Montgomerys had tried to cheat the Pierces and failed, and public opinion, which had been lukewarm toward Josephine and Dalton, swung firmly in their favor. Even Samuel Garrett, who had been cool toward them, began treating them with respect. "Looks like we are finally being accepted," Josephine said one afternoon as they drove back from town, where several people had gone out of their way to be friendly. "Took them long enough," Dalton replied, but he was smiling. "Though I have to admit it is nice not to feel like we are fighting the whole town." The baby arrived in late September, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him Thomas, after Josephine's first husband, a decision Dalton supported without hesitation. "He was part of your life, part of what brought you here," Dalton said, holding his newborn son with a gentleness that made Josephine's heart ache. "It is right that we honor his memory." Motherhood transformed Josephine in ways she had not expected. She had always been strong, always been capable, but now she felt a fierce protectiveness that went beyond anything she had experienced before. This was her son, hers and Dalton's, and she would do anything to give him a good life. Dalton was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with Thomas. He would walk the floor with the baby at night so Josephine could sleep, would talk to him constantly as though the infant could understand every word. Watching them together, Josephine fell in love with her husband all over again. The farm continued to prosper. They expanded their cattle operation, and Dalton proved to have a gift for breeding quality stock. They paid off more of their mortgage, and Dalton began building the larger house he had planned, working on it during the winter months when farm work was lighter. 2 years after Thomas was born, Josephine gave birth to a daughter they named Emma, after Dalton's sister. The little girl had her mother's blonde hair and her father's green eyes, and she was doted on by both her parents and her older brother. By 1887, the farm that everyone had expected to fail was one of the most successful operations in Weld County. Josephine and Dalton had fully paid off the mortgage and owned their land outright. They had expanded to 300 acres, built a beautiful new house, and established a reputation for quality cattle that stretched all the way to the Denver markets. The neighbors who had tried so hard to force them out were forced to watch their success. Richard Montgomery eventually sold his own ranch and moved to Wyoming, unable to bear the daily reminder of his failure. The Hendersons kept to themselves, Mildred's bitterness having isolated her from most of the community. Samuel Garrett, to his credit, apologized to Josephine one day in town for his earlier behavior. "I was wrong about you, boss," he said simply. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, and your husband is a good man. I am sorry I did not see that sooner." Josephine accepted his apology graciously. She had learned that holding on to bitterness only hurt herself, and she chose instead to focus on the good in her life. One evening in the summer of 1888, Josephine stood on the porch of their new house, watching the sun set over land that was truly theirs. Dalton came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different everything is from 6 years ago," Josephine said, leaning back against him. "When that dust devil tore through my field, I thought it was the end of everything. I never imagined I would end up here with all of this." "With me?" Dalton teased gently. "Especially with you," Josephine said, turning in his arms to face him. "You saved me, Dalton. Not just the farm, but me. I was so closed off, so determined not to need anyone. You taught me that needing someone is not weakness, that love is not something to be afraid of." "You saved yourself," Dalton corrected. "I just helped a little. You're the one who refused to give up, who fought for this place when everyone said it was impossible. I am just lucky that you let me fight alongside you." Inside the house, they could hear Thomas and Emma laughing as they played before bedtime. The sound made Josephine smile. "We made a good life, did we not?" "The best life," Dalton agreed. He kissed her softly, a kiss full of promise and contentment. "And we are just getting started." Josephine believed him. They had overcome so much already: loss, poverty, sabotage, doubt. They had built something solid and real out of dust and determination. Whatever challenges the future might bring, she knew they would face them together. The farm that her neighbors had wanted her to fail at running, the land they had circled like predators waiting to pick apart the remains, was now a testament to what could be achieved through love and partnership. The cowboy who had ridden onto her property on that long-ago July day had become her husband, her partner, the father of her children, and the love of her life. He had made sure she never had to sell, but more than that, he had given her something she had not known she was missing: a true home, not just in a place, but in a person. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Colorado sky in shades of orange and gold, Josephine took Dalton's hand and led him back inside to their children, to their home, to the life they had built together against all odds. She had everything she needed, and more than she had ever dared to dream. The years continued to unfold with a richness that Josephine had never imagined possible. By 1890, their cattle operation had grown to include a partnership with John Carmichael, the rancher who had first leased them stock. The arrangement benefited both parties, and it solidified their reputation throughout Colorado. Dalton's eye for quality animals became well known, and ranchers from as far as Cheyenne would make the trip to Greeley to see his stock. Thomas, now 6 years old, was already showing signs of his father's affinity for animals. He would follow Dalton around the ranch, mimicking his movements and asking endless questions about the cattle. Emma, at 4 years old, had her mother's determination and could often be found helping Josephine in the kitchen or the vegetable garden, her little face serious with concentration. Josephine found that motherhood suited her in ways she had not anticipated. She had worried that she would be too hard, too practical to be the warm, nurturing mother she felt her children deserved. But Dalton's love had softened something in her, had shown her that strength and tenderness were not opposites but partners. She could be firm when necessary and gentle when needed, and her children thrived under her care. The town of Greeley had grown significantly since Josephine first arrived. The agricultural colony that had seemed so precarious in those early years had established itself as a prosperous community. New businesses opened regularly, and the population had swelled to over 2,000 people. Josephine and Dalton were now respected members of the community, their success story something of a local legend. Emma Dalton, Dalton's sister from Denver, visited regularly with her family. Her children and Josephine's children had become close, and the cousins would run wild around the ranch during visits, their laughter filling the air. Emma had become one of Josephine's closest friends, a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection. "I am so glad my brother found you," Emma told Josephine during a visit in the spring of 1891. They were sitting on the porch, watching the children play while Dalton and Emma's husband checked on the new calves. "I have never seen him so content. He was always searching for something, never settling. But with you, he finally found his place." "I am the lucky one," Josephine replied, pouring them both more lemonade. "I do not know what would have happened to me if he had not ridden onto my property that day. I like to think I would have survived somehow, but I cannot be certain." "Oh, you would have survived," Emma said with confidence. "Dalton told me how you were when he first met you. Determined, proud, refusing to accept defeat. You would have found a way, but I am glad you did not have to do it alone." That summer brought unexpected news. Harold Henderson came to their ranch one afternoon looking older and more tired than Josephine remembered. His wife Mildred had passed away suddenly from a stroke, and Henderson seemed lost without her. "I know Mildred was not kind to you," he said, sitting awkwardly in their parlor while Josephine served him coffee. "She was a hard woman, wanted things I could never give her. But she was my wife, and now she is gone, and I do not know what to do with myself." Josephine felt compassion for the man, despite the trouble his wife had caused. "I am sorry for your loss, Mr. Henderson. Whatever disagreements we had in the past, I would not wish such pain on anyone." "You are gracious to say so," Henderson said. "The truth is, I came here to tell you something. Mildred confessed to me before she died that she was the one who cut your fence that time, back in 1882. She had Montgomery's ranch hand do it, but it was her idea. She wanted you to fail so badly that she was willing to sabotage you. I should have stopped her, but I was a coward." Josephine exchanged a glance with Dalton, who had been standing quietly by the window. "That is in the past now," she said gently. "We survived it, and we have moved forward. I appreciate you telling us, but I hold no grudge." Henderson left shortly after, and Josephine stood at the window watching him ride away. "Do you think I should have been angrier?" she asked Dalton. "No," Dalton said, coming to stand beside her. "Anger would not change anything, and that man has enough pain to deal with right now. You did the right thing." "Mildred must have been so unhappy," Josephine mused. "To spend so much energy on trying to hurt someone else. What a waste of a life." Dalton pulled her close. "Some people never learn that happiness comes from building things, not tearing them down. We are lucky we figured that out." In the fall of 1891, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news brought no anxiety about finances or the future. They were secure now, established, with a thriving ranch and money in the bank. She could simply be joyful about the new life growing inside her. The pregnancy was easier than her previous two, and in May of 1892 she gave birth to another son. They named him William, and he had blonde hair like his mother and a calm, peaceful temperament that was all his own. Thomas and Emma were delighted with their new brother, and the house filled with even more noise and laughter. Watching Dalton with their 3 children, Josephine sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was her life. The man who had arrived as a drifter with nothing but a horse and a good heart was now the center of her universe, the foundation upon which their entire life was built. He had given her not just security but joy, not just partnership, but deep, abiding love. One evening in the summer of 1893, after the children were in bed, Josephine and Dalton took a walk around their property. It had become a habit of theirs, these quiet walks in the evening when the work was done and they could simply be together. They walked to the spot where the dust devil had torn through her cornfield 11 years earlier, the event that had preceded Dalton's arrival. The field was lush now with healthy crops, and the land bore no trace of that long-ago damage. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Josephine asked, taking Dalton's hand. "If you had ridden past instead of stopping? If I had refused your help?" "I try not to," Dalton admitted. "It is too terrible to imagine. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine. You and our children, this life we have built. I thank God every day that I was in the right place at the right time." "I was so afraid of you at first," Josephine said with a soft laugh. "I thought you must have some ulterior motive. I could not believe someone would help me just because it was the right thing to do." "You had been hurt," Dalton said. "You had every reason to be suspicious, but I'm glad you took a chance on me anyway." They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by land that was theirs, listening to the peaceful sounds of their ranch settling in for the night. The cattle were quiet in their pastures, the horses were safely in their stalls, and inside their house their 3 children slept peacefully. "Do you ever miss it?" Josephine asked suddenly. "The drifting, the freedom of not being tied down?" Dalton turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Josephine, I need you to understand something. That life, the drifting, it was not freedom. It was running. I was running from commitment, from responsibility, from the possibility of loss. I did not realize how empty I was until I met you." He cupped her face in his hands. "You did not trap me. You freed me. You gave me permission to stop running, to put down roots, to build something lasting. Every day I spend with you is a gift. Every morning I wake up beside you, I am grateful. I have never missed that old life, not for a single moment." Tears gathered in Josephine's eyes. After 11 years of marriage, he could still move her to tears with his words. "I love you," she said. "I will never get tired of saying that." "Good," Dalton said, kissing her softly, "because I will never get tired of hearing it." They walked back to the house, hand in hand, their steps unhurried. Inside, Josephine checked on each of the children, tucking blankets around sleeping forms and pressing kisses to soft foreheads. Dalton stood in the doorway watching her, and when she turned to leave, he pulled her into his arms. "3 beautiful, healthy children," he said, "a successful ranch, a paid-off mortgage, a partner I love more than my own life. How did I get so lucky?" "We made our own luck," Josephine said. "We worked for it, fought for it, refused to give up on it, and we did it together." The years that followed were good ones, filled with the ordinary magic of a life well lived. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding to 500 acres by 1895. Dalton's reputation as a cattleman grew, and he began receiving invitations to speak at agricultural conferences throughout the state. He always declined, preferring to stay close to home and family, but the recognition was gratifying nonetheless. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the animals. Emma was bright and curious, constantly asking questions about everything she encountered. Young William was the peacemaker, the child who could diffuse any argument between his siblings with a smile and a gentle word. In 1896, Josephine's father came to visit from St. Louis. It was the first time he had made the trip west, and Josephine was nervous about his arrival. Her father had disapproved of her first marriage to Thomas Taylor, thinking the move west was foolish. She had not seen him since before Thomas's death. But when her father stepped off the train in Greeley and saw the successful ranch, the beautiful home, the healthy grandchildren, his disapproval melted away. "You proved me wrong," he said simply, embracing Josephine for the first time in years. "I thought you were making a terrible mistake, but you built something remarkable here." "Not just me," Josephine said, pulling Dalton forward. "This is my husband, Dalton Pierce. None of this would have been possible without him." Her father shook Dalton's hand, studying him with sharp eyes. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he smiled. "You take good care of my daughter," he said. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. "Every day of my life," Dalton confirmed. Her father's visit lasted 3 weeks, and by the end of it, he had fallen in love with his grandchildren and developed a genuine respect for the life Josephine and Dalton had created. When he left, he promised to return the following year, and he made good on that promise. By 1898, their ranch had become one of the largest and most successful in northern Colorado. They employed several ranch hands, and Dalton had taken on a foreman to help manage the daily operations. The additional help meant that Dalton had more time to spend with his family, a luxury he never took for granted. Thomas, now 14, was already working alongside his father and the ranch hands, learning every aspect of cattle ranching. He had grown tall and strong, with his father's steady temperament and his mother's determination. Emma, at 12, had developed a passion for horses and spent hours working with the ranch's breeding stock. William, at 6, was still finding his place, but showed signs of having his mother's head for business. One evening in the spring of 1899, as Josephine and Dalton sat on their porch watching the sun set, Dalton said, "Do you remember what Montgomery said all those years ago? About how I would regret staying here?" "I try not to think about him," Josephine said. "I have not regretted it for a single day," Dalton said. "Not one moment of one day. I want you to know that." Josephine turned to look at her husband. He was 42 now, with threads of silver in his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. He was the most handsome man she had ever seen. "I know," she said simply, "just as I want you to know that you gave me back my life. You gave me hope when I had none. You stood beside me when everyone else wanted me to fail. You made me believe in love again when I thought that part of my heart was dead. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Dalton Pierce." They sat together as the stars came out, comfortable in the silence that comes from years of companionship. Inside the house, their children were preparing for bed, their voices carrying through the open windows, the sounds of their family, their life, their home. "No regrets?" Dalton asked softly. "Not a single one," Josephine replied. "Only gratitude." The turn of the century brought changes to Greeley and to the world beyond. The frontier was closing, the Wild West of Josephine's youth transforming into something more settled and civilized. But on the Pierce Ranch, life continued its steady rhythm, guided by the hard work and deep love of two people who had refused to let circumstances defeat them. In 1901, Thomas announced that he wanted to expand their cattle operation even further, with ideas about breeding programs that excited Dalton. Emma declared her intention to become a veterinarian, a bold ambition for a young woman, but one that her parents supported without hesitation. William showed an aptitude for mathematics and business that suggested he might be the one to take over the financial management of the ranch someday. Watching their children grow into capable, confident young adults, Josephine and Dalton took pride in what they had created. Not just a successful ranch, but a family built on love and mutual respect. They had given their children a foundation of security and possibility, something both Josephine and Dalton had lacked in their own childhoods. One afternoon in the summer of 1902, 20 years after Dalton had first ridden onto Josephine's property, they stood together at the same spot where they had first spoken. The old fence post where Dalton had tied his horse that day was still there, weathered but sturdy. "I was so desperate that day," Josephine said, running her hand over the rough wood, "so afraid and trying so hard not to show it. And then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not known how to pray." "I was lost that day," Dalton said. "I did not know it, but I was. I had been drifting for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to have a purpose. And then I saw you, standing in that ruined field, and something inside me just knew. This was where I was supposed to be." "Do you think we would have found each other if circumstances had been different?" Josephine asked. "If my crops had not been destroyed? If I had not been so desperate for help?" "I believe we would have," Dalton said firmly. "Maybe not that day, maybe not that way, but somehow. Some things are meant to be, Josephine. We are meant to be." She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. They were both in their 40s now, their hair graying, their bodies bearing the marks of years of hard work. But the love between them had only deepened with time, growing richer and more complex with each passing year. "The neighbors wanted me to fail," Josephine said softly. "They circled like vultures, waiting to pick apart what was left. But you made sure I never had to sell. You gave me so much more than that, though. You gave me a partnership. You gave me love. You gave me a future I could not have imagined." "We gave each other those things," Dalton corrected. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more." They walked back to the house together, their steps matched after so many years of walking side by side. Inside, the house that Dalton had built with his own hands was filled with the comfortable chaos of family life. Emma was arguing with Thomas about something, their voices passionate but not angry. William was practicing his sums at the kitchen table, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. This was the life they had built together, against all odds and in defiance of those who had wanted to see them fail. The dusty cattle ranch in Colorado was worth more than all the gold in California, because it was theirs, earned through sweat and determination and unwavering love. As the years continued to pass, the Pierce family legacy grew. Thomas eventually took over the day-to-day management of the ranch, proving to have inherited both his father's skill with cattle and his mother's business acumen. He married a school teacher from Denver in 1905, bringing new energy to the family. Emma defied convention by attending veterinary college, becoming one of the first female veterinarians in Colorado. William moved to Denver to work in banking, but returned home regularly, never forgetting his roots. Josephine and Dalton became grandparents in 1906 when Thomas and his wife had a daughter. The joy of holding that tiny baby, seeing their family line continue, was profound. More grandchildren followed over the years, and the Pierce Ranch became a gathering place for multiple generations. Through it all, Josephine and Dalton remained the heart of the family, their love story, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew old together, their bodies slowing, but their connection as strong as ever. They still took their evening walks when weather permitted, still sat together on the porch watching the sun set over land that had tested them and ultimately rewarded their persistence. In the spring of 1910, on their 28th wedding anniversary, Dalton gave Josephine a locket containing a photograph of them from their wedding day. They looked so young in the picture, so uncertain of what the future held, but the love in their eyes was unmistakable even then. "We made it," Josephine said, tears gathering as she looked at the photograph. "Against all odds, we made it." "We did more than make it," Dalton said, his own eyes damp. "We built something beautiful, something lasting. Look at what we created together, Josephine. Not just the ranch, though, that is remarkable, but our family, our children and grandchildren, the life we have shared. That is our real legacy." Josephine closed the locket and pressed it to her heart. "I would not change a single thing," she said. "Not one moment, not one decision. It all led to this, to us, to this beautiful life we share. Neither would I, Dalton agreed. He took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years together. You are my home, Josephine. You always have been. From the moment I saw you standing in that field, I was home. They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had faced down adversity and emerged victorious. They had proven the doubters wrong, had built something substantial from dust and determination. The neighbors who had wanted Josephine to fail so they could buy her land had been thwarted by a cowboy who had made sure she never had to sell. But more than that, they had found in each other the kind of love that transforms everything, the kind of partnership that makes all things possible. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Colorado sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, Josephine rested her head on Dalton's shoulder and smiled. They had their struggles, yes. They had known hardship and doubt. But they had also known joy beyond measure, love deeper than the prairie soil, and a connection that would last until their final days. The ranch that had nearly been lost to greedy neighbors was now a thriving legacy that would be passed down through generations. The love story that had begun with a desperate woman and a drifting cowboy had grown into something epic, a testament to what could be achieved when two people chose to stand together against all obstacles. And there, on the porch of the house that love built, Josephine and Dalton Pierce held hands and watched the stars emerge, knowing that their story, their love, their life together would echo through time. They had won, not just against their circumstances, but for something far greater. They had won each other, and that made them the richest people alive.